Hi, we're back with another book review, and today we're going to be taking a look at a bit more of a chunky book, being Needful Things by Stephen King. Needful Things was released in 1991, and it was originally dubbed The Last Castle Rock Story. Castle Rock is a town in Stephen King's multiverse, which follows a storyline of its own, kind of, but not really. It's hard to explain. Each Castle Rock book follows their own storyline, including Needful Things, but they usually build off of the previous book in some way or another. They're only loosely connected, and aside from Needful Things, the previous Castle Rock books weren't even labelled as such. Because they build off of each other, they do kind of spoil some of the other storylines from the previous Castle Rock books. And I think if I'm going to mention how to read Castle Rock books, because you might not want to just jump straight into this one if you haven't read any of the others, because you might get spoiled, you should read them in this order. The Dead Zone, Cujo, Skeleton Crew, which is a short story collection with a couple of its stories taking place in Castle Rock, The Dark Half, The Sundog, which is a novella in 4 Past Midnight, and finally, Needful Things. Now, this is really long-winded and confusing, so you don't necessarily have to read these stories in order, aside from leaving Needful Things towards the end, which is what I'd recommend you do. Especially considering that The Sundog from 4 Past Midnight serves as a sort of prelude to Needful Things. I'll make a more in-depth video about this sometime in the future, but for now, let's just get back to talking about Needful Things. So my edition of Needful Things is 933 pages. So yeah, it's a massive bloody book, and thankfully, it's really, really good. Again, this is a long book, but I absolutely loved it, and I will admit that the pacing is a little wacky if I'm looking at it critically. I'd say that the first 300 pages of this book are a little too slow. Like, seriously, nothing, like, for like this chunk of it, like, nothing happens at all. But then, after about that 300 pages, something really snaps, and it is just incredible. There was something that happened about 300 pages into this book that set off a chain reaction, and for the last 600 pages or so, I just could not put this book down. It was so good. Because I only just finished this recently, I'm still riding off the high of being just so overwhelmed by the last 2/3 of this book that I honestly forget that the first third was extremely slow. So I'd say, although the pacing is a little wonky to start with, the book ends up being really good, and it's well worth your time. So this book has a very strange plot. So let me try to explain. A new shop opens up in Castle Rock, run by a man named Leland Gaunt. The shop is called Needful Things, and it always seems to have something that the customers desperately want for a relatively cheap price. But the people who buy something from Needful Things have no clue how much they are going to pay later on in the future. I'm going to leave it at that because it's best if you go into this book not knowing that much. You'll have a fantastic time. I've heard people compare this book to like a black comedy of some sorts, and I have to agree. There are some parts in this book that made me chuckle amongst all the horror, and the gruesomeness of the rest of this book is just, yeah, has little moments of dark humor sprinkled in between it all. There are some scenes in this book that are very confronting and horrifying, but throw in a few dark laughs up there, it almost lightens up the mood. Almost. This is definitely one of the most overwhelmingly bizarre books of his that I've ever read, and I can guarantee you will not expect how crazy this book gets. It's so much fun, and I'll be perfectly honest, this might be like the most fun that I've ever had reading a Stephen King book, because so much is just happening, and it just throws curveballs at you all the time. It's like mental overload. Now, of course, I have fun reading all of Stephen King's books, but this one was just so much fun because it was just pure dumb fun. But at the same time, it's weird because it's also one of his most disturbing books. See what I mean? It's a really hard to describe book. If I had one complaint about this book, it's definitely the ending. I won't say much, but it was just really disappointing. It didn't fit the tone of the rest of the book, and to be honest, it was just pure shit. But it's only the last 20 pages of this massive book, so it doesn't really detract from the experience too much. Needful Things gets a straight 90% from me. I don't know if it critically deserves a 90% because there are definitely some major flaws, such as the pacing and the ending, but I had such a good time with this book that honestly I don't even care. Thank you for watching my review on Needful Things. I hope you enjoyed it, and again, I highly recommend you read this book if you haven't. It's one of Stephen King's lesser talked about books, and it's a hell of a thrill ride, so I'd give it a go if I were you. See you later.